There are many important things that you have to do as a teacher. The socio-economic choices and opportunities that will be presented to the children you teach and to their progeny will be based on the quality of information you teach and the opportunities you offer. Wow, that's an overwhelming thought. So right now, let's just stick with the important things you have to do as a teacher planner or a teacher organizer, like planning and writing a single lesson plan. When you write a lesson plan, you have to have a clear idea of what you want to accomplish. You also have to have a clear understanding of how much of that can be done within a single class period, given a certain number of minutes. After all, much of what we teach will have to be spread out over a series of days and perhaps weeks in order to accomplish a goal. What you need to teach needs to be broken down into logical portions that flow smoothly from one day to the next. As you know, in Florida, the question, "What should I teach?" has been answered for you by the Department of Education. What you need to teach is listed in the Sunshine State Standards found at this web address. In a previous lesson in this class, and perhaps in previous classes with me or another teacher, you have become familiar with the Sunshine State Standards. The Sunshine State Standards from the various content areas look similar to each other, but each content area uses different labels to express the same idea. Look at pages 1 and 2 of the handout that accompanies this PowerPoint. You can see that in science and math, you will see the phrase big idea. In language arts and social studies, you'll see the word standard. Both of these phrases mean basically the same thing. These terms mean goal. The goal is put into words in the sections labeled benchmark description in the science area, description in the areas of math and language arts, and title in social studies. Read those goals now and notice that they are written in general terms, that there is no explanation as to how the student will accomplish the goal. There's no specific activity to do or tools to use during the activity, and that there is no indication of how the student's performance will be measured or assessed. Outlining those things is not required when writing a goal, but they are required when writing an objective. One of the biggest challenges for the pre-service teacher is to learn the difference between a goal and an objective. When writing a lesson plan for a critical assignment, you will be graded on how well written your objective is, so you need to be sure that you are truly writing an objective, not a goal. An objective is very different from a goal. A goal is an overarching aim that is not measurable. An objective, on the other hand, is very specific and states a clear action that the student must take. As seen on the handout pages 1 and 2, and discussed previously in slide 3, goals can be found in the Sunshine State Standards immediately following the words big idea, standard, benchmark description, description, and title. A goal is achieved by accomplishing many learning objectives, so the learning objectives are listed under the goal, under the big idea, the standard, the benchmark description, the description, or the title. On page 3 of the handout that accompanies this PowerPoint mini-lecture, you can see an example from language arts. Look at it now while you're listening to me. You can see that the standard is the goal, highlighted in blue. And under the standard is the list of benchmarks, highlighted in lavender. In other words, under the goal are the objectives. In this example, you can see one language arts Sunshine State Standard for the 7th grade. This Sunshine State Standard names for us a goal for a 7th grader. The goal is the standard. The goal is that by the end of the school year, the 7th grader will know how to use multiple strategies to develop grade-appropriate vocabulary. I know this is a goal, not only because Mrs. Acevedo said that anything labeled standard is a goal, but because this statement is general. There is no description of how this will be done or how we will know that it's been accomplished. So we continue reading. Underneath the standard is a list of benchmarks. There are 11 benchmarks total. There are the 11 objectives that must be met in order for the goal to be met. Notice how each objective or benchmark defines specifically what it means to use multiple strategies to develop vocabulary. But still, the specific how will this be done exactly is missing. So these benchmarks are a good rough draft for writing your lesson plan objectives. They themselves are not the objectives that you will simply copy and paste into your critical assignment lesson plans and be done with it. A learning objective must have 3 basic components: performance, standard, and condition. If these 3 parts aren't there, then you have not written a learning objective. The performance is what the student must do. This part of the learning objective must contain one activity and only one activity. The performance part of the learning objective must be written with a verb, an action verb, something that you can see the student do. The standard part of the learning objective tells how you will measure the performance. It must be precise and measurable. Your learning objective must also state the condition or conditions under which the student will perform the objective. All 3 components are critical. Let's take a look at some correctly written lesson plan objectives. I have written the objectives in 3 different colors so that you can see the 3 different components of a lesson plan objective. The condition always is the first part of the sentence and it will be written in orange. The performance is the center part of the sentence and it's written in this purple color, and the standard is always at the end of the sentence and it's written in blue. So let's look at our first example. It says, given a spool of thread, a sewing needle, and a piece of fabric, the learner will stitch a 12-inch straight line using the back stitch with 100% accuracy. You can see the sentence is color-coded, one of the components directly following the other. There are no extra words in there. Notice how the condition, which is the orange part of the sentence, rules out other unacceptable ways to do the task. For example, you can't use a sewing machine. If you do, you don't demonstrate on this objective. You cannot use embroidery floss. If you do, you're not going to pass this objective. You have to only use thread, sewing needle, and a piece of fabric. Notice how the standards statement and the performance statement it defines success, basically. If the line that you stitch is crooked, you're not going to demonstrate. If the line is less than 12 inches long or longer than 12 inches, you're not going to demonstrate because you have not followed these instructions. Here's another example. Given only his bare hands, the learner will catch a trout in less than 5 minutes with 100% accuracy. Again, notice how the condition rules out other unacceptable ways to do the task. You cannot use a fishing line, you cannot use a net, you cannot use a bucket. The only thing you can use for this task that you're being measured on is your bare hands. And again, look at the standard part, the blue part of the sentence. It defines success. If it takes you longer than 5 minutes, then you are not achieving the performance. Now, earlier this evening when my children asked me why I was spending so much time on the computer, I had to explain to them what I needed to teach to you. So we started playing around with objective writing, and here are 2 objectives that my 6- and 8-year-old came up with. Given a high-pitched tone of voice that won't stop screaming, the student will make his mother pull out a handful of hair with 100% accuracy. Given a pair of muddy feet that leave tracks on the floor, the student will make her mother yell with 100% accuracy, and on it goes. So as you can see, you'll have lots of fun practicing this at home with your family. Your children are experts at something. In the previous slide, you probably noticed that the objectives were all written in a similar pattern, and that's because in our program, all of the professors expect your learning objectives to follow this pattern. You state the condition using this phrase, you state the performance in this way, and you state the standard in this way. Let's look at an academic objective now. Look at the Science Sunshine State Standard located on page 4 of the handout accompanying this PowerPoint mini lecture. Your job is to write a learning objective using the benchmark and its description as a rough draft. You have already learned that all learning objectives have 3 parts: the condition, the performance, and the standard, and that your learning objective must be worded to fit into a set pattern. So let's examine this science description and see how much we can get out of it. First, we need to find information to help us write the condition. Now remember, the condition is the tool or materials to help us get the job done. There are none suggested in this benchmark description. It just says investigate and apply how the cycling of water between the atmosphere and the hydrosphere has an effect on weather patterns and climate. No tools, no materials, so no help with that one. Let's see if it helps us out with writing our performance part. Remember, the performance is an observable doing verb, an action verb that you can see the student doing. Now, there are 2 action verbs in this Sunshine State Standard. They happen within the first 3 words of the description: investigate and apply. So we got a little bit of help with our performance. Moving on to the standard. 70% is the normal line between C work and D work, and since I want all of my students to pass, 70% is the absolute minimum I can choose for demonstrating on the performance. However, I can choose another percent, anything between 100 and 70%, based on how important it is to successfully complete future work. In other words, the other benchmarks that are listed under the standard or the goal. We know that everything that we need to write needs to be in a set pattern. Given a blank, the student will blank with blank % accuracy. Well, so far, this particular Sunshine State Standard has only helped us to fill in that middle blank. The student will investigate or the student will apply. I have to choose the percentage on my own, and it looks like I've got to come up with ideas for what I need to give to my students so they can get the job done. So our rough draft hasn't given us much help, but the help that it has given us is very helpful because good verbs are sometimes tough to choose. So let's break this down even further and get a better look at each of the 3 components. We'll start with the performance, since the benchmark description helped us by supplying two possible verbs to use in the learning objective. But you've already learned that each learning objective must contain only one action verb. There are two verbs here. Which one should you choose? For this discussion, it might be helpful to have your printout of Benjamin Bloom's Taxonomy of Educational Objectives. In the 1950s, Mr. Bloom, a researcher from Penn State University, published this list. Bloom and his list are extremely important to know about if you are going to be an educator, because he made valuable contributions that allow us to write learning objectives that challenge our students. He dared us to write techniques and therefore objectives that cause students to use different types of thinking over the course of a unit plan. Bloom described 4 different types of knowledge and 6 different levels of thinking. On the handout I typed up for this class, I focus only on the different levels of thinking. If you're looking at the handout now, you'll see that the 6 levels are remembering information, understanding information, applying information, analyzing information, evaluating information, and creating by using that information. Also in the handout, I provide several example verbs that a teacher would use if writing a learning objective for a technique that requires that type of thinking. In addition, I provide sample question words and question starters that a teacher could use while assessing orally or in written form. Now, I bring up Benjamin Bloom because right now we are trying to figure out how to write the performance section of a learning objective. The 2 verbs from the benchmark description are investigate and apply. Let's look those verbs up on Bloom's taxonomy to see which levels they fall into. If they both fall into the same level, then we can choose to start our unit with either one. But if one falls into a lower level and the other falls into a higher level, then we must choose to cover the lower order thinking skill first. Now, investigate does not appear anywhere on this handout, so I need to think of synonyms. Examine is a synonym for investigate, and I can find this verb in the level 4 list. The verb apply comes up in level 3, and also in level 5 is the questions, can you formulate a theory for, and can you predict the outcome if. So the teacher would have to decide whether or not these 6th grade students had sufficient background knowledge to begin with investigating and then proceed to application. My guess is that in 6th grade students would have sufficient background knowledge, so I want to investigate first and apply at Bloom's level 5 second. With that decision made, I know that the verb I will focus on in my learning objective will be investigate, not apply. And we need to plug that right there into our set pattern. So now we have given a blank. The student will investigate the cycling of water between the atmosphere and hydrosphere with blank % accuracy. Our Sunshine State Standard Science Benchmark description reads, investigate and apply how the cycling of water between the atmosphere and the hydrosphere has an effect on weather patterns and climate. And we have chosen to focus on the investigate verb because of the two verbs, it's the lower order thinking skill. Thus, investigating this topic in the 6th grade must come before applying. Now, before we move on to the remaining two components of the learning objective, it's important to discuss the choice of verbs. As I've pointed out, most of the time the verb you should use is alluded to and sometimes even included right there in the Sunshine State Standard. When you write lesson plans for your critical assignments, for structured field experience, and for student teaching, your supervisors and mentors will be grading you on whether or not the Sunshine State Standard matches up with the objective that you write, and also whether the Sunshine State Standard and the objective match up to the activity, and finally whether or not the Sunshine State Standard, the objective, and the activity match up to the assessment. All four must match up. It is also important to make sure that the verb you choose is observable. It is an action that the student does, and you can see the student doing that action. Let's look at the objective we've written so far. Is the verb investigate in this sentence observable? I would argue that it is not. So I would go to Bloom's list once again and find a synonym that is observable. I like the synonyms list, distinguish, dissect, divide, and classify. These verbs show the student is not only doing something interiorly. Exteriorly, he is dividing the water cycle process into steps. He's distinguishing distinct steps. He's listing the steps. I think I'll choose to use list instead of investigate in order to prove that he can do something, explain the steps, because of his investigation. So my revised objective will read, given a blank, the student will list the steps involved in the cycling of water between the atmosphere and the hydrosphere with blank % accuracy. We must be able to see somehow that the student has indeed performed at the standard you chose, the % of mastery that you chose. Verbs like understand and know will never be acceptable to any of your professors because we cannot measure them. Let's view 4 objectives. The first one is correctly written. Given a drawing, the student will label the parts of the water cycle with 100% accuracy. The next 3 are poorly written objectives. Given a video presentation, the student will know how the water cycle works with 100% accuracy. Given a textbook reading, the student will study the water cycle with 100% accuracy. Given a PowerPoint presentation, the student will understand the water cycle with 100% accuracy. Of these 4 objectives, only the first one is measurable. You, the teacher, can take the student's completed drawing, read the labels that he has written on it or affixed to it, and decide if the labels were placed correctly or not. If he labeled 3 of the 5 parts correctly, for example, then he's earned 60%, or he knows 60% of the information. Clearly, he has not met the objective, and remedial work or review needs to begin. With the other 3 objectives, there is no way to know if the student has mastered the information at 100% or 60% or any other %. It's time to finish up this mini lecture by discussing the 2 remaining components, condition and standard. The most important thing about standard was already brought up in slide 7. The lowest passing score you would ever want to pick is 70% because that's the normal line between C work and D work. However, do you really want just average students in your class? Do you really just want them to kind of know the material? Of course not. With the proper instruction, students can be expected to master the material. Hold the bar high and help them to reach it, even your ELLs. Supplementing your lessons with plenty of visuals, manipulatives, realia, props, and scaffolding will help them to reach the stated objective. Choose any percent between 100% and 70%. Choosing the condition is the fun part. This is the part that no one controls but you. This is where you state that you are showing the student a PowerPoint or a DVD or video, or having the student participate in a blog or a wiki or a debate or a video creation or an experiment, or reading the textbook or completing a handout of some sort, or whatever it is that you want them to do in order to gain information. Our Sunshine State Science benchmark description reads, investigate and apply how the cycling of water between the atmosphere and the hydrosphere has an effect on weather patterns and climate. So far, we have written this. Given a blank, the student will list the steps involved in the cycling of water between the atmosphere and hydrosphere with blank % accuracy. It's time to fill in the remaining spaces. Using your imagination, you could insert anything. How about this? For your condition, given a DVD presentation. For your performance, the student will list the steps involved in the cycling of water between the atmosphere and the hydrosphere. And for your standard, with 100% accuracy. Finally, a note about English as a second language in CALA. We've learned that CALA demands 3 techniques: content instruction, CALP instruction, and learning strategy instruction. As a result, for each ESL lesson plan, you must write 3 objectives. 1 content objective, which is written using the content area Sunshine State standards, for example, science, math, social studies, and so on. You need to write 1 CALP objective, which is written using only the Language Arts Sunshine State standards, as well as the ELPS, the English Language Proficiency Standards, and 1 learning strategy objective, which is written using the name of the learning strategy listed in the CALA handbook and the verbs that explain the strategy. For example, I'm an ESL teacher writing a CALA lesson plan. I need to write 3 objectives for my 1 lesson plan. I'm teaching a first grade social studies class, and this is the benchmark and possibilities for corresponding content, CALP, and learning strategy objectives. Explain the purpose of rules and laws in the school and community. Well, I know that my content objective needs to be about my social studies benchmark. It needs to be about rules and laws in the school and the community. So, as an example objective for the content, I would write, given an opening day discussion about school and classroom rules, the student will orally brainstorm the purpose of 3 rules or school rules with 100% accuracy. For the academic language objective, the ESL component of this lesson plan, I know that this objective needs to be about the language demands of the social studies activity expressed in the benchmark description. So, as an example objective, I have, given a pre-writing plan, the student will write 3 sentences using capital letters and ending punctuation correctly with 100% accuracy. Finally, my learning strategy objective needs to be about the learning strategy that the student needs to use in order to get the job done. So I have written, Given instruction about the grouping learning as strategy, the student will fill in a pre-writing plan with 100% accuracy. All three of these objectives are connected to each other and connected to the Sunshine State Standard, and as I finish writing my lesson plan, I need to bring each of these things up throughout the different steps of the CALA plan. In sum, this mini lecture taught you 5 things. First, remember that goals are different from objectives. Second, I want you to remember that the Sunshine State Standards will help you to figure out the goal and get you started on writing your objectives. Don't forget about Benjamin Bloom. You also learned that each lesson plan needs 3 objectives, one for each of the 3 CALA techniques. Each objective must contain 3 parts: the condition, the performance, and the standard, and each objective must be written using the same set formula.